And then like to check the computer. Hello, hello. Oh, I like this sound system. I'm loud. Good evening. Good evening. We appreciate your patience this evening. Can everyone hear me okay? It's a really good sound system. I am Melissa Brown, Interim Communications Director for the City of Flint. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here. We are also Facebook Live, so we are monitoring that as well to take any questions. Again, tonight is our third ARPA input session, and we welcome you all here this evening. We have a few new faces to the platform. As you can see, I am not Don Jones. Don Jones was unable to be here this evening due to a family emergency. We wish her well and best wishes with her family and safe travels. And so I, Melissa Brown, will be your moderator for this evening. We also have some other faces that will be a little different from our first two input sessions. First, Rob Whittigan, our Chief Financial Officer, is also unable to be here. As you may be aware, there's also a special City Council meeting this evening, and his time was needed at that location. So in his place, we have the lovely Lottie Ferguson, our Chief Resilience Officer, who will be able to answer all of your questions and give you an update regarding this process as well. Then our third person that we have this evening is Brian from Ernst & Young. It was unable to be here. And so his great colleague, MG, and we say MG because her name is also Melissa. And so we're trying to make sure when people say Melissa, we're like, what? What are you talking about? So MG is also here this evening from Ernst & Young, and she will be able to answer questions regarding the process and our next steps. So that's out the way. The next thing, housekeeping. Where are the restrooms? I just tested that location. Out the doors, to your right, immediately to your right again, the hallway that you use to enter the building, that is also where the restrooms are located. So I wanted to get that out the way. If you have any questions, please just go ahead and raise your hand. The way we will work this evening, we will start with an overview of the ARPA funds, where we are, next steps. After that, we will open it up to questions. The intro and that information should only take us no more than 20 minutes so that we have a full hour, 15 minutes to answer all of your questions. If we were unable to get to your questions this evening, please see us afterward and make sure that we collect your information. We are also have, at the back of the room, Ms. Tommy Johnson has some handouts for you if you're interested in that information as well. So with that, we will get started with this evening. You have been welcome. Next thing we have. I would like to hand it over to Mayor Sheldon Neely with open remarks.
Good evening. You know, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out today to be able to be a part of our third ARPA sessions. This is another great day that God has made and blessed us to be here to share this information. But one of the things I do want to talk about just really briefly, and I'm not going to be long-winded with this, is about what we're trying to do here. And we want to make sure we saturate the environment with the good information about what is going on and how we're going to be using these dollars, these one-time dollars. And I don't want people to be confused about what this is and what this is not. We have two pots of money that we're working with inside the City of Flint. One is our regular budget that we do every single year for the City of Flint for the operations in which we have to engage in for our day-to-day. And then the American Rescue Plan dollars that was released by the President, $1.9 trillion from the White House and high-minded legislations to be able to get a good start, restart after the worldwide pandemic, and what these dollars are to be captured and used for. We still have a structural deficit and a financial challenge inside the City of Flint. Do not be confused when we start talking about these $94.7 million, because we have been and still are in a financial crisis amongst the other things that we have to deal with on our day-to-day. And we understand that it's a frustrating time for many people. So our idea, through the input of many people and residents, I see Claire McClinton here tonight, was to saturate the environment with levels of input.
I'm sorry, they can't hear you talking to Mike a little quiet.
Okay. to saturate the environment, to make sure we have good input. Now, there's been a little bit of confusion about two sets of meetings, but that's okay if we're providing good information with both sets. And this administration wants to make sure that we work with everybody of like thinking to move these dollars in position to make sure that we can improve the quality of life for residents in the city. Now, the principal points and what our ARPA dollars are to be guided for. And I'm going to read the principal points, and they blew it up big enough for me to see it this time. We talk about equality. Our recovery plan should reflect the voices of all residents and seek to reduce racial and other disparities. The responsibilities. The American Rescue Plan funding is a temporary investment. Our investments should lay out the foundation for lasting change, but not create future financial burdens for the city. Stability. Our plan should combat environmental injustices and mitigate the long-term effects of climate change. Compliancy. We must ensure that every dollar is spent on eligible activities and are accounted for properly. Every dollar should be accounted for and spent properly. That is why we secured a firm to make sure that we can track these dollars from its inception to its expiration. And I provided something for people that usually people in elected positions do not do, as a 100% guarantee that these dollars will not miss its target, and that's the enhancement of the quality of life for residents in the city. We will stand firm and we will stand strong on that. So these sessions will be completed before we go forth with the application process, and we will do so with equity, equality, and assurance that everybody has the opportunity to get their voices heard to ensure that we can spend these dollars in the areas that we need to. Transformational. The projects we fund should produce outcomes that make measurable differences in the people's lives. We will focus the dollars on long-term impact. There we go. That's where you can follow me. Long-term impact. Transparency. We pledge to make decisions openly, informing residents on how the money is spent and deliver the results. Leverage. And this is important. In the $1.9 trillion released, they still got about $46 billion with a B of competitive dollars. NY has been contracted to help us seek out and apply for those additional dollars to be able to help support the activities in which we have. We don't have to use all of these dollars in certain areas where we can draw in additional money and partner with other organizations and entities to make sure that we can lift everything. And that speaks to the last point, leverage. Our plan should prioritize investments that collaborate with other funds, helping generate new revenues or cost savings to recycle dollars and multiply their impact. Meaning that the City of Flint, $94.7 million. The County of Genesee, $77 million. The Flint School District, $114 million. So, just for a note, the City of Flint is in Genesee County, meaning that 1 out of every 5 of those dollars belongs to us. How can we multiply and have a greater impact with these dollars to change things? So we're working hard to make sure that happens. We want your input. Everyone in this room should have had a survey form to talk about it and talk about the bucket list. And the reason I'm talking a little bit longer is because I know we got, we called in some people off the bench. Not that you're a JV player, but, we have a council meeting going on tonight. And so you understand the process. You have 2 co-equal branches of government. The administration does its job and the council has their job. The administration proposes, the council can dispose. Every financial piece, by law, is presented from the administration. Then it goes to the council for affirmative vote or a negative vote. But the process begins with us. I'm open to work with anybody, and I will do so, without a doubt. Unapologetically, we will move forward together. That's why this is important for us to be here tonight. So I thank you. I thank Sarah. I got her name right today for signing for our people in the community that is hard of hearing. I thank you again for being here. And I turn it over to Lottie now, right? Lottie, it's up to you. Thank you, guys.
Good evening. Again, my name is Lottie Ferguson. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer in the Mayor's Office here in Flint. What you see right in front of you is the chronology so far. In April 2021, we initially released a survey to get some feedback on what residents thought the funds could be used for. And then in May 2021, just the next month later, we received a half payment. So $47.3 million came into the city in May. August of 2021, there were 9 ward tours to gather additional information from residents on how to spend the funds. And then in January of this year, Ernst & Young, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes, was contracted to help with compliance. Mayor already mentioned it a couple of times that we want to make sure that all of these dollars are spent in compliance of what the ARPA rules are. Mr. Whittigan wanted me to make sure to show you that these are the rules that we have to go by in order to properly spend these funds. A lot of paper here. Just last month, February 2022, a premium pay resolution was adopted by City Council. So the first thing we did was take care of our first responders. They worked hard. They've put themselves in danger working through the pandemic, and so we wanted to make sure to appreciate them first. Also last month, the online survey was updated, and the link is live on the City of Flint's homepage right now, www.cityofflint.com. I believe there are hard copies of that survey here with Ms. Johnson in the back tonight. And so right now we are at the public input sessions. This is the third of 4 public input sessions to provide information to residents and to hear how you would like to see this money spent. So in front of you now is a slide with identified funding priorities. These came about as a result of the initial surveys taken and the 9 ward tours that happened. This is a draft. This is draft funding priorities. So these things can be changed. The things that rose to the top of the list at that time, economic development and blight elimination, safety and crime prevention, help for homeowners, infrastructure, and of course, coming through a pandemic, we need to place a heavy emphasis on public health. So this was created, again, after the initial public feedback. We reviewed the city's master plan and the capital improvement plan and what we believe is, at this time, eligible per, oh, they took my guidelines, per that hefty stack of papers, the guidelines from the U.S. Treasury, that one, yeah. So the funding priorities are not limited to these categories, and you're here today because we want to hear what you have to say, how you want to see these dollars spent. So the funds are available for use, and they must be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and they have to be completely spent by December 31st, 2026. Obligated means the funds have to have a purpose. They have to have contracts have to be written, the funds have to have a purpose, and then expended by 2026, the end of the year 2026, for larger projects such as building projects that may not be able to be completed by 2024. So what is next? You'll see this slide again. We'll go over it once and then we'll go over it again just to make sure the community understands what's next. We've got to complete all our input sessions and then process all of that input, and then we'll do a joint public review session with City Council. We will finalize and present the recovery plan and budget. We'll announce the notice of grant funding opportunities, eligibility, and application instructions. And I want to point out here that we will make sure that this process is fair, equitable, and accessible for Flint residents, Flint community organizations, those who are interested in applying for the funds. We'll get the projects initiated, and then we'll monitor and publicly report on progress. Just one more item that CFO Whittigan asked me to note. The mayor already noted it, so it's obviously worth repeating. They highlighted in yellow. These dollars cannot be used to fix our structural deficit. Cannot be used to fix our structural deficit, so we still have some work to do to tackle that problem. Ernst & Young. Melissa.
Thank you, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Melissa Glenn. I'm a partner at Ernst & Young, and I work with many communities who have received these funds, these ARPA funds across the country, figuring out the strategies they want to employ. And as was highlighted, starting with the mayor's points around compliance, why we care about compliance is, and the use of the funds in a way that is consistent with that big binder of guidelines, is that the U.S. government and the U.S. Department of Treasury can actually call those dollars back, and they could take them back from us, which would be a terrible thing not to be able to direct them in ways that serve the city and the residents of Flint. So that's why we're so concerned about making sure we put in compliance standards, that everything is done correctly, is documented correctly, and then the funds, the way they're spent and what they're directed for, is in accordance with all the guidelines and the eligibility standards. So talk a little bit about what was behind this legislation that led to the Rescue Plan Act. It is a wonderful opportunity. This is, as mentioned, one-time dollars. There are other funds that are available one time, and they are all designed to help our country come out of this pandemic better than we started. And it is hopefully a great gift that we can use these investments wisely and help, to make ongoing and, as we said, equitable changes to communities all across the country, and most specifically here in Flint. So just highlighting behind me, overall, we wanted to highlight some of the foundational guidelines of this legislation. It's a very significant amount of money that is associated with it. And as the mayor highlighted, sometimes these monies are a little overlapping as well, because there'll be money that goes to the city, money that was directed to the school district, money that goes to the county, money goes to the state of Michigan as well. So that's where we have this opportunity to make sure that we leverage these dollars to make the investments appropriately. But overall, one of the key foundational guidelines actually is why we're in this room to start with, which was around having community input, making sure that these funds were, shared, and the potential for how these funds will work was shared with the community, and that you did get a sense of how they could be used, and there was feedback, and there's outreach, and that you'd have input into the direction that both your council and the mayor and the administration all put in place to make these investments. So that's that's already been taking place with town halls and these community input sessions, was really making this a very stakeholder involved process, and that is happening all across the country. And that's one that was really prioritized here, certainly by the administration, and I believe by City Council as well. Some of the foundational guidelines were, first and foremost, unfortunately, we are still in a pandemic. There are still costs associated with getting through that, and those costs may be getting tests available, making sure people have access to vaccinations, they have access to masks, whatever it may be, as we all experience being out in the community. When we need more plexiglass dividers, anything that keeps the community safe as we respond to, unfortunately, what remains an ongoing pandemic. I know, things are obviously improving, but as a community, we all still have to navigate that. So first and foremost, it was, let's get through the pandemic. Let's make sure that the response the community puts in place is not constrained by a lack of funds, that the funds are there to do the right things and to keep people healthy and safe, and to hopefully get people back to the point where they can be working in offices, be out in the community, have kids in school, and get back to our daily lives as much as possible in a way that is, not putting anybody at risk. So that was, foremost. Then we get back to equitable recovery. And part of the goal, obviously when the pandemic first started, there was a lot of economic uncertainty. Folks who typically went to work a certain way, some of them didn't have access to their jobs. There were, revenue shortfalls because, we all know that things we used to do certainly were changed because of the beginning of the pandemic. We didn't go to movie theaters. We didn't go to restaurants. We weren't out and about in the same manner. So businesses were affected. The routines of everybody were affected. Every element that we used to have, from getting revenues from parking meters because nobody was parking, certainly could be affected as well. So we were looking at how do we make up certain revenue shortfalls that were experienced both by the city and by the communities. So that's another area of that foundational guidelines of how should this money be used. So I mentioned first was address the health concerns of the pandemic. Second is bounce back economically, and hopefully not just bounce back and make up ground, but figure out how do we make investments that can be even more impactful and have long-standing impact overall. And then, finally, is think about investments in how we actually provide government services across the country, and I'm sure here as well. We learned a lot of things about how people need to be supported, not working the same way where you expect that everybody comes to an office, waits in line, waits for government services. A lot of things went online. People needed to be, attended to differently in the community. So those kinds of investments to put in public-facing services were another major foundational element of this legislation, meaning how do we spend this money and how do we do it in a way that's eligible. So those, highlight, I'd say, some of the major elements. And then finally, something I know near and dear to everybody in this community are making investments in infrastructure and using this money, to make those kinds of investments, whether those are around transportation, about the quality of roads, and certainly one of the areas that has been highlighted is about water and sewer, water quality, investments that have been, unfortunately, longstanding challenges across the country to make, and to be able to find enough capital funding to make the kinds of significant investments that will really help us address shortfalls in the kinds of capital funding that we need to have safe water, safe roads, safe transportation systems, and other types of investments in our infrastructure overall. So those are really the areas that were called out in that big binder that allude to. Those are the kinds of areas that the U.S. Treasury, who will oversee how every community that is awarded these funds spends these funds, anticipates that we make those investments. Hopefully that's helpful to everyone. So some of the requirements in this big binder are around the ways the city, because the city's directly receiving money from the U.S. Department of Treasury, has to report how it uses funding. And part of that is there are quarterly reports that will be required, and those all have to be publicly available, so you will be able to track how funds are being spent by the city and how much of those funds that were obligated, how quickly those are drawn down and applied, and how quickly those are spent. And then there are annual reports that need to be posted as well. So all of the reporting of how the city actually does spend the money is very public. It will be very open. But within those, there are specific expense categories. So these are even more further detailed than those foundations that we just highlighted before. So mention, how to deal with health issues and how to deal with the health effects of the pandemic. You see these expense categories, starting with supporting public health, as you mentioned, dealing with negative economic impacts of the pandemic, as well as looking at long-term changes that can be made as an investment to help the community address economic impacts that have just occurred, as well as maybe those that have been unfortunately long-standing. We see those especially where we kind of highlight services to disproportionately impacted communities. Certainly, as I'm sure people have read about, there's been a lot of research to understand that differences in our communities, those that have had the same access to public health, the same access to services, those communities, unfortunately, not everybody's been affected equally. So looking at how do you make investments, and this category is specifically around how do we make investments so that folks have the same kind of access, the same opportunities in each community, and those can be around issues like public health, they can be about education, they can be around infrastructure like broadband and internet access as well. So those are really about providing investments to attain greater equality in each community. Finally, one of the areas that has already been in front of the City Council for resolution, was highlighted, has been around premium pay to make sure that folks who are frontline and essential workers who needed to be out in the community and in many cases expose themselves to greater risk. Certainly before we had the vaccines available, those folks really were able to get what we call premium pay to uplift some of their compensation and to address the risks that they faced. Finally, as mentioned previously, one of the guiding principles around these funds have been for infrastructure. So appropriately, some of the categories that we track expenditures will be specifically around infrastructure, and as I mentioned, including broadband investments to make sure that there is access to internet at individual homes, and this is across the country. This is a huge level of investment for these rescue plan funds, as well as other funding that the U.S. government is making available. Finally, as I mentioned, it's not revenue loss was experienced at the community level by private businesses, but it also revenue loss was experienced at the government level as well. And not all revenues were available. In many cases, tax base was affected. Other revenues that come into the city may be affected as well. So in that case, what we're looking at is expenses that can fall into making those revenue losses whole, and we'd be tracking those. And then finally, any other administrative expenses associated with the oversight for these these funds, and actually operating some of the programs that will be initiated and approved for expenditure. So these highlights all of the expenditure categories that will be tracked as the funding is obligated and then spent over the course of the period, what we consider this eligible period, which, as were highlighted, will effectively run through 2026. So that's a lot of detail around, but what the key takeaways from all of this is there are a lot of rules over how these funds can be spent, and there are a lot of rules specifically around how we track how we spend these funds. But where we are right now is really continuing to get input from the public to make sure that the priorities for dedicating and allocating funding really meets with the priorities that everybody has, that you have an opportunity to understand what this money can and can't be used for, so you have a better understanding of how the city can commit it, and then you'll have an expectation over time of what you will see publicly reported on how the city is actually spending all this money. Okay. Yeah? Okay. Do you want to highlight? I think we mentioned that we'd show this slide twice. It's not an oversight, but the idea was to show it before to give you a sense of where we are now and planning and what is coming up next from the standpoint of beyond the planning, how we'll start to actually allocate, how we'll start to fund, and how we'll start to report and track all the funding associated with the American Rescue Plan Act and the opportunities it has for the city. So, I think there's one more input session scheduled. This is the third out of 4. And certainly there's also surveys that provided, as well as surveys available online, if not provided in hard copy. So those will all be collated, all the inputs. We showed earlier the preliminary priorities for funding. Want to see if those are still the priorities or if those have moved at all based on the feedback that's received. And then, we'll conduct a joint review session based on those inputs, based on where we thought we were from the standpoint of those priorities, and kind of pull that all into a plan. And part of that plan is the money that has been directly allocated to the City of Flint. The money, as the mayor highlighted, how can we leverage monies that are available at the state level, competitive grants that are also available out there, the priorities that the schools will make with their funding, the priorities of the county. So that'll be considered as part of the plan, and then certainly the budget. And then what will be issued are opportunities for specific projects, and that's what this bullet around grant funding opportunities, eligibility, and applications. So those will be publicly made available, how different funds will be distributed, what it'll take to apply for those funds, what will be the timelines to receive funding, how much funding would be available to each of those programs. So that would be all available. And those other projects, those funds, as well as other projects, would be started. And as I mentioned, all of this will continue to be tracked, monitored, and reported. And it will have to be all reported on the website, so you can all track where the money is going and how quickly it's getting spent and to whom. So those all of what we expect to have coming up next.
Thank you, MG. Did it right. I just wanted to acknowledge, I know our Facebook audience is having a difficult time seeing us. They can hear us pretty well, but they can't see us that well. So our apologies for that. We hope that you can still hear everything. Please submit your comments if you have any, or use our email address at input@cityofflint.com to submit your comments. And later today or even tomorrow morning, we'll also make sure that the link to the web page to do more input is available on our Facebook page. So again, our apologies for the visual right now during the live session. We have now come to the Q&A portion of our input session. I ask that you keep your comments and suggestions regarding how the funds could be used to 2 minutes. I will be timing you and graciously letting you know when your 2 minutes are up, and I hope that we all can abide by that time frame to allow everyone their due chance to participate in this input session. So again, there will be 2 minutes that you will be allotted to make your comments or ask your question. If you want to dance for 2 minutes, it's your 2 minutes, but it is 2 minutes. And so at this time, I will go around and call on people if we have to repeat the question so that others can hear what the question was before it is asked. I will make sure that that happens. So at this time, we will have those who were presenting. They're ready to answer your questions. Are there any questions to start?
Melissa, go ahead and we can have them turn up the house lights now. I think the presentation portion, so we can actually let the Facebook.
I think this is
Where the lights go.
That's why. I mean. Do we have any questions? Somebody could raise your hand so I could just know and we can call on someone. Okay. Yes, and if you could speak loud. I have a big voice. Everyone else have a big voice. But if I need to repeat your question, I will.
Well, I have a big voice. So, Dominique Strong, on behalf of Women Strong Marshall Outreach. My question is, can the one-time expenses be used to purchase a land-based property or one of the 9 school buildings that's available for purchasing, and to substitute for community centers? Can those funds be used for those reasons? If so, what is the process?
So the question was, can the funds be used to purchase Flint school buildings, abandoned properties in Flint, if they can be used for that, and those that are owned by Flint Community Schools and also the land bank? Is that the gist of your question? Thank you.
To substitute for community centers.
Mayor.
So the answer is potentially yes, that they possibly can be used for those purposes, but it has to be. So the way this process sort of works, we have to explain how it'll benefit the community. There has to be more details around. Yeah. And one of the highlights that the mayor started with was making sure that we highlighted that one of the key components in thinking through how these priorities work and how funding will be allocated is being very mindful, as well as making investments and commitments that then the city will have to uphold. And once these one-time dollars are spent and no longer available, will they potentially put the city into greater financial challenges? So that's one of the considerations that we have, as well as to think through, unfortunately, if we obligate funds, now we'll have this funding, but it'll all be spent and not available after 2026. Is there a way to support that sustainability, as you know, and the maintenance costs and everything else? So thinking through all those elements. So it's a potential, but a lot of other elements need to come into play to make sure the answer could be a definite.
Do you have a question? Thank you for the information. I have a big question, and I'm hoping that you all will project a little bit more, because my senior ears are having a little bit difficult to hear you sometimes, even when you're at the mic. But I would like to say, the diagram that you showed with respect to how the information will be captured, tracked. Can you match that with these priorities? Because I saw one there, if you can go back to that diagram, there's one there that talks about disparities, service to disproportionately impacted communities. There's nothing clearly outlined in the priorities that are in this request for us to fill out a survey that addresses that issue. So I would like to see how these 5 priorities, if these are the ones that you're asking the community to weigh in on, how do these priorities fit with the guidelines so that we can be sure we're aligning the priorities with how the funding should be spent?
And I do think, and I'm just make sure on that survey, there should be a spot on the survey that allows you to put in something outside of those priorities, like an open other section. That should be an option too on there.
Got that.
Yep.
But I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Because if we're going to be weighing in on how these dollars should be spent, if you have clear outlines of where the tracking is going to happen for expenditures, it would be helpful that there's some connection or correlation between those.
And I think overall, I get your point. Certainly, when we look back and you look at these kind of categories, bear with me. We look at, and this may be a little harder to see, these preliminary identified priorities. Certainly, we can think of, these are not exclusive. So when we think about making investments in public health, those investments certainly could be directed to communities that have been disproportionately affected. So those things can coexist together. So, for example, making investments in community centers, those community centers might very well target that aspects of the community that have disproportionately been affected. So those things can work together. Hopefully that makes sense, but they're not exclusive of each other. One of the things that we've been looking at when we make decisions about where to fund would always be considering, who's been affected. And I think as the mayor starting out, those foundations that we're thinking about are equality, better access to services, equality for opportunity, and all of those kind of fit together with that expenditure category.
Noel Arnold with Communities First and 7th Ward resident as well. I just want to comment that there is a good opportunity here to invest in affordable housing in our city. We know that just use some of their ARPA funds to complete a redevelopment of a vacant building that has been vacant for about 40 years into over 100 units of senior housing. So there's been a model of just an hour away of using ARPA money to make sure there's a house for everybody. And also to do things like homeowner rehab of existing homes. I know you mentioned about nursing homes and land bank. How do we rehab all these vacant homes in our community? This is a unique opportunity for a one-time kind of capital investment in that. But also, I think it's important that we prioritize things like economic development. We have a lot of these great older business districts in our city. We think of Welch and Chevrolet, Beckman Atherton, Davidson, and Franklin, that with things like facade improvements or sidewalk improvements or investments in businesses in those places. It's a one-time expense that can have a real big impact. And so we'd love to see a priority on that. And on sort of new residential development that's walkable, it's accessible for people taking the bus, that's inclusive, that's got space for people of all incomes. And then lastly, really importantly to us, is also using this as an opportunity. We're supposed to update our master plan every 5 years and every 20 years. This is a chance to also do that as a one-time expense and to get it out to our zoning ordinance, which we do need to be updated in almost 50 years. So there's a lot of good opportunities for really good investments around housing and economic development as one-time investments that could be really transformational for the city without burdening the city with a bunch of long-term legacy.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, how are you? I'm late, and I wasn't properly introduced to you. I was actually watching this online. I just came to town, and I'm only here for a day. So I'd like to know you before I introduce myself. So who are you, ma'am? What's your
Hello.
name?
Hi, my name is Melissa Glenn. I'm a partner at Ernst & Young and working with on behalf of the city.
Where are you from? What city?
I personally am from Washington, D.C., but I work with my colleagues who are based in the Detroit area. And, so.
Where'd you graduate? What high school? I'm asking a question. I know you do. I apologize. I'm just trying to. I came late, so I don't know you. I didn't get a chance to watch the introduction that you made and the other slides prior to this. So before I formally introduce myself, my name is Taquan Buford. I'm a lifelong resident of Flint. I live in the 2nd Ward, 3813 Comstock. I own property on Welch, Chevrolet, Bassett Park. Really, in that it's an area called the Green Zone, but it's actually a red zone. If you look on the area ward, it's the 2nd Ward, 1st Ward, 5th Ward. It's a cusp in the City of Flint. It's a circle called Civic Park Circle, where there's literally not one school, one elementary school, one middle school, one high school. So when I'm looking at this up here, that's beautiful. When I'm listening to certain questions, those are beautiful. But as a 31-year-old young man that found success in life without college or education, I don't think that's the best for our kids here. So I would like to just get up to speed in the understanding of the people that live in the areas that's going to require 10 to 15 years of this to get their kids and their mental capacity sustainable to where they'll be able to come and fill these seats up and be concerned citizens to come and be involved and engaged in $90 million that go into the city. Because number one, this administration, I trust to do the right thing with these dollars. I've never saw a group of individuals that have been able to collectively come together through so many situations with the pandemic, these crises, and these buildings that are dilapidated before they were in office. So I'd like to really understand what is the plan for my little cousin that's 4 years old that walks outside right now and there's no streetlights on Welch. The infrastructure is cool. All these things are amazing, but these things are things that I really don't feel like this administration is responsible for. So they really shouldn't take the grunt of these actions, because that'll be a blame that they'll face. Because prior to this administration coming in was 2 other administrations, well, technically 4. These roads been messed up since 1984. These schools been closed. So the question,
I'm
asking a question.
I understand, sir, but I need you to understand that we had a 2-minute mark for this. I know you came a little late.
I got my question out. So my question to you, ma'am, is based off of the funding priorities and the things I missed. Was there anything I missed in your presentation prior to me walking in and sitting in that presented a plan for youth and community engagement for the children in the future? That was my question, and I wanted to make sure that you knew the background first. Okay. Yes, okay.
Yeah, but the question is, this is the input session.
No, for ARPA, but the question is for the ARPA lady, and I don't want to put the mayor in any position to answer questions for the ARPA lady. So I don't want my question asked at all. But thank you for being here, representing Washington, D.C., and bringing interest that will be able to bring us up, because I believe that you working with these people, we're going to move forward. Thank you so much for being here, and that's my input. And I hope that you and Mayor Neely can achieve the things that y'all are trying to do. And I'll go back to my business. Take care. God bless y'all. Residents, I appreciate you for building the things that you're doing, sir. Yes, sir.
Right, let's get back to where we are, and thank you, Taquan, Mr. Buford, for that. But what these are is the input sessions on what you want to see and how we envision the future of the city of Flint. Far too often we get sidetracked by, not to say that we were sidetracked here, but this is about the vision and how we prepare the structure in order to be able to do the things that's necessary for the next generation. This is about vision. And we want to make sure we incorporate everybody's vision for this community moving forward. We will not be distracted nor sidetracked about where we currently are, but this is about vision for the future. So this is your input session to provide your input about what we need to do and move forward with that. The compliancy firm is here for a couple different primary reasons: to track the dollars, to make sure from its inception to its completion, and reporting back, making sure this 430-page document is acquiesced to, making sure that we can comply with all rules set, and then also attracting additional dollars to the city of Flint to be able to make our vision bigger and more robust. But this is your time to have an input. We will report back for the areas, the criteria. I've heard good questions. I made great notes at every session. And so I'll turn it back over to Melissa to continue to get more questions in.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, ma'am. How you doing?
Hi, my name is Cynthia Hayes. I'm an advocate for prison reform.
Washington DC?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to ask a question. All this is fine and dandy. It's beautiful that, this display, this array of where everybody thinks the money should go and how it should benefit the city of Flint. But I think that we really need to be in the core of Flint with the residents to build the city back up. And when you do that, you have to hit inside of the family homes. You have to go into the schools because all this that you're doing and speaking of, it's fine. It's a beautiful picture. But if you don't hit the core and hit the core of the school and go inside the family home, inside the people's minds, and see what do they really need, this is nothing. Because all this money that's coming here, really, in my personal opinion, it's not going to benefit the areas that is really needed. To me, it's just not, I'm just being honest. You have all these fair housings, all these other organizations, and all these other people that's coming here from other cities getting jobs and grant money. But we need to focus on our city, and we need to focus on the people in the city. Because when you focus on the people in the city and you give them inspirational hope, the city will build. When you got other people coming in, no disrespect to you, because I felt that there could have been other people here in Michigan, Flint, doing your job.
I want to
No,
I just want to be.
Just let her, just
Oh, no.
But we're trying to build up our city. We're trying to build our people up. We're trying to build our home, our children. We're trying to build our neighborhoods up. And all this is fine. And to me, most of this money might be distributed. But how do we know it's going to directly go to the core of the community? With all these other entities that want to try to put in for this money, how do we know that they're really going to invest in the community and the people? How do we know? Who's going to watch that? Are you going to come from Washington, D.C. watching over this money?
Just to bring it back again once to focus. We talked about the priority portions of this, and one of the key primary responsibilities that we have and that we've outlined, we talked about the level of transparency and reporting back. So I stepped up and above and I said I give a guarantee that these dollars will be tracked. This is your opportunity to say, where would you like these dollars? Transformational, $94 million for Flint, $77 million for the county, $114 million for the school district. These are transformational. I need to hear from you all. What plan would you like to have outlet? I've heard good plans. I've heard from Mrs. Lewis talking about the area of tracking, making sure the equality level is getting to the disparate communities for those that may be more at risk than others. I heard from Dominique Strong talking about recreational and educational and discipline opportunities for young people in a setting that they can feel safe. I heard about the need for affordable housing in this meeting here. I heard from the Disability Network about ADA compliant recreational opportunity sessions that we have here in the city of Flint. I want to hear from the residents. I guarantee you that I'm from Flint. I've been here every day of my life, and I will be here. So I would love to hear another question about how these dollars should be spent, and we will take into those considerations, and we will go through an application process where we talk about the level of equality and delivering these things, not to friends and family, but to actual programmings that we can sustain and have a level of sustainability. The firms that we hire, bringing corporations and companies in, they all don't have to be from Flint to be able to be beneficial to this community. Okay. Next question, please.
Yes, sir, the back.
So much. My name is Bruce Thompson, and I'd love to see some money directed toward the MLK Business District. I am resident of Flint, worship in Flint, work in Flint, live in Flint, and I'm grateful to pastor a church that is steps away from the MLK Business District. When I was a little kid, we could leave Sunday school and walk down to Pinky and get ice cream and all that good stuff. But I would love to see the MLK Business District be built up to something that is viable, sustainable, and where people from that community can shop and eat and drink coffee and go to the internet cafe, all kinds of possibilities that
piggyback a little bit off of what the gentleman just said because I feel the same way. But I also want to know, and I'm hoping this happens, we have schools that the young lady talked about a few minutes ago, that especially Garfield, we've been trying to talk to different people, and I'm hearing some things that sound good, that if we could just go in that school and just kind of revamp it, and maybe have people that knows how to build, people got some kind of trade or something, that we can teach our young men and women how to get a skill that they can go out into wherever they go and make a living. So I'm hoping that this will be part of the money that we look into some of these empty school buildings, because we got a lot of them, that we will put back in here and start trying to help some of these young people get a skill like Job Corps or something like that, build off of that, so they can get a skill and learn how to do plumbing, whatever. Also, because I'm hearing that there are a lot of people that have these skills. Matter of fact, I talked to a young man last night. They would be volunteers to help come into these places and teach these young men and women these skills. Because I feel like a skill will cut down a lot of crime. And we are working hard to try to get Martin Luther King Boulevard, Martin Luther King Peace Garden and all that together. We enjoy it. But we need the help. So I'm looking at surrounding areas of the Third Ward, if some of that money can be allocated to us.
Thank you, ma'am. But I also want to acknowledge that the Superintendent of Flint Community Schools is also here. And Superintendent Jones, you raised your hand. I want to see if you want to speak to this.
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Hello, Mayor. I would like to just welcome the conversation to those of you who are concerned about some of those school buildings. I'm going to give you a number one, and an email address, because our board is very interested in and Mayor, I'm not trying to take over the meeting, I just want to help out a little bit. Our board is very interested in offloading some of our schools, okay? And it's not about money more than it is about really giving back to our community with viable and really good programs.
Right.
And so I'm hearing a lot of good information about what we want to see in our city. And so if we can help by having you come to a board meeting, we have a board meeting next week, next Wednesday night, right here in this room at 6:30. You can speak to our board about the buildings that you're looking at or the buildings you want to see revived, or, we're in the midst of talking about renovating our schools, refacing our schools with the money that the mayor mentioned, and also some partnerships about building schools. It's time for Flint to have new schools.
Yes.
All right. But it's time. We haven't had a new school built since the early 70s. And so it is time. And we want to work with our city, our mayor, as well, to ensure that we are using these dollars that's given to both parties in a viable way, and in a way that we can sustain, and as the young man was trying to say, support those scholars that are coming up that are young. And so 810-760-1249. You can reach, and the name is Monica Elston. She is the executive assistant to the superintendent, and also the secretary for our board. And also giving you an email address, superintendent@flintschools.org, and we can get information to you all and to the right people for you to look into those buildings if you're interested. So I just wanted to kind of help out with that, because I do know that the city is trying to do some things like the pastor talked about, but also Flint Community Schools have money to do some things as well. So there is some work that we can do that will offload, take some of that stress off of the city, and and vice versa. So we want to work together, and some of that conversation you can have with the school system instead of the city as it pertains to our babies coming up and the schools that they go to. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Jones. I want to just do a time check. I know your conversation has raised more hands, and that's a wonderful thing. I want to be mindful of time. We're at 7:14, so we have just about 15 minutes left in this great discussion, and I want to make sure we get to everyone. So I am going to try to stick to the time so that all people can be heard during this session. I did see some hands. Look, if you could just raise them again, I can make sure I'm calling you. You were next, and I'm going to get you next, Mel. After her, she had her hand and she was up.
Real quick, Connie Edwards, 68 years old, resident, has been here all my life. Quickly, I just want to say I have been to the last couple of them, and I need to retract something that I did. When you make a mistake, you stand it for and try to correct it. I was not intentionally to attack anybody in the city, nor at least the mayor. We have talked and we have worked this out. So I can say that the city is on board, and ditto for the Martin Luther King corridor. We've been working on that, and they're going to work with us. They're going to help guide us and give us some suggestions to make that corridor of Martin Luther King proud when you come in the city. The other thing that I would like to see some of the ARPA funds go to is the disability network, especially to train the young folks to help our residents and seniors stay in the city so they don't have to move out in apartments, but to help them with installation, ramps, bathroom stalls and stuff. So we would really appreciate it, because I'm at that age, 68, and those ARPA funds would help keep me in the city of Flint.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Claire Clinton of Flint, so I want to raise here. And I want to raise the issue about water. Water is such a key focus with COVID. You needed water to wash your hands, even before they had the vaccines. That was one of the steps, social distancing and masking, but water was critical. And unfortunately, in the city of Flint, we pay in the highest water rates in the country. That is negatively impacting the quality of life of the people. And it did during COVID. Had it not been for some community champions and advocates that went to the governor, after which she ordered no shutoffs. Why? Because when you got a COVID pandemic, you need to wash your hands. But when we wash our hands in Flint, we pay too much money. It costs us money to wash our hands to be safe. So what I'm saying is, we know that ARPA funds can be used to help people with their bills, but 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 months from now, if you don't have your income didn't go up, so you right back where you started. So what I'm proposing is that we find a way to leverage the funds. If you can't directly institute a water portability, you do some things to help lay the groundwork for water portability, and also no shutoffs, and also that affect the babies. Also, if you don't have water service, they can take your kids. Water is something else. They can take your kids. You know that, Superintendent Jones. And for some years now, there's been an advocacy and an attempt to get a handle on our water rates. We got to get why should we be paying the highest rates in the nation and we surrounded by great rates? My sister lives in Arizona, her water bills are nowhere near mine. She lives in the desert. So we want to do something about these water rates, because that's a COVID issue, it's a community health issue, and it's a quality of life for residents issue. And I appreciate you, Mayor Neely, when you suspended the shutoffs, but they're reinstituted now. We're disappointed with that. And we want you to look back at that. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
it doesn't have to be, and I think what's happening a little bit is more of like a, don't forget about me in my neighborhood, and don't forget about me over here, and don't forget me. And I think what needs to, when I say I think, this is just an idea that can be explored. But like, even like years ago when the city came up with the master plan, if you go back and you take a look at the master plan, they have a lot of these neighborhood centers, community centers, a lot of those things were identified in the master plan as far as places that you can invest in, community nodes, where commercial districts can go, and those different things. A lot of that zoning that was attached to that plan wasn't approved. It hasn't been approved yet. That's slowing up a lot of these things. And I think it doesn't have to be a zero sum. It's really an opportunity for us to take this funding and really leverage it, because if you put, 10 million in one area, 5 million in another, 4 million, like you might be able to spread these out and really be able to give, I'm not gonna say everybody, because you can't solve all the world's problems, but you could make some pretty heavy investments in some areas where there has been disinvestment for a very long time. The other body is how can we use ARPA funds to generate income for the city? And what I mean by that is, like, I understand a lot of people are just thinking about, but also think about, the revenue from the city side, right, and where we're at as far as income. Is there anything we can do from a renewable energy perspective? Is there ways that the city can generate income through making an investment using these funds? I don't know what that could be, or it could be some type of long-term, income play. Because we need income as a city, other than that we can't survive. So just, just thinking about those different opportunities and what might, be available. Joel from my team already spoke for some other stuff. And then my last question is when do you expect to actually start allocating the funds? Or open up the application process to actually, so people can actually turn on the projects? I guess that's my other question, is I keep hearing, a lot of getting community, but when does that actually move from community to actually implementation?
And I just want to say that's a good one, because we did get a similar question from our Facebook audience about the RFP process and the timeline for that. So whoever can get as concise as possible to explain that process would be great right now. Concise process about the RFP process. Concise process.
The process, we have one more informational session. We have one more informational session coming up. Then we're going to try to work very hard with our council counterparts to be able to get all the input that they have from their sessions. We'll digest all the information, and then we have a report out, and then we will start the process with a timeline. We've been talking about the timeline, but it will be probably within 30 days of our last session. And that's what we're going to do.
And can, I don't know if MG or Lottie can speak to just the RFP part, how that could possibly work for those who are looking to submit.
So we're still working with Ernst & Young to finalize that process. But what I can say is a lot of the input that we've heard, especially from smaller organizations in the community, that the process needs to be accessible. We want to make sure that larger organizations that funds typically trickle to, because they've got excellent grant writers and lots of grant writing experience. Those are great, but we want to make sure that we are fair, equitable, and accessible in this process, so that those who don't always have access to additional funds can get the technical support they need to get a good application in and get access to some of these funds.
And I want to put it just in this form on record. I did have a few people who asked me about just assistance and almost workshops on how to fill out those forms, how to do the RFP process, and then once you get those funds, how to maintain for your own compliance and making sure that you're spending the money appropriately. And so that has come up also from community members saying, I got the money, but I've never done this before, and so I do need some help on the operations side and running the program that I just got awarded, but then also the operations and making sure that we're in compliance and using these funds as well.
Right.
So that has come up a few times.
And remember that we have to have these funds obligated by December 31st of 2024.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Neely. I'm with the International Center of Greater Flint. I have a question for the young lady from Ernst & Young. Do you have any, and I don't know if you or but the agency itself, any best practices as to what other communities have done to actually implement this process?
Hi, yes, we've been working with our firm. We've been working with hundreds of communities across the country. So definitely there are best practices on different programs that are in place, different ways to use this fund as well as other funds. So we will be drawing upon those. But I do want to highlight that, this is your plan. This is a plan. That's why these sessions are going on, to make sure those priorities are, and this isn't an Ernst & Young plan. This is the City of Flint plan, but we do have best practices or things that are working well for other communities and some things that don't work that well, so that we can highlight, consider this, but if you're going to do it, you want to think about how do we learn from other places we've worked, other cities that we've worked in, other counties, big and small.
We probably have time for one more comment, question. If you didn't get your, think of something after today's session, please know that you can also email us at input@cityofflint.com. There's also a online form you can fill out, and we have some paper forms in the back. So were there any final questions? Thank you all for coming out this evening. We appreciate you. The last input session will be on March 8th.